52.
52.
That's a year. And we're still here.
Maybe we can stop saying that after
year.
52.
Maybe. Doesn't feel like a year, does it?
No.
Feels like less.
Yeah. Technically, when we're recording this has not been a year.
Right. It'll be published in a year.
So maybe we are like 10 months as far as recording goes, right? Or not?
No, 11 and some change.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've only got 3 or 4 in the bag.
I thought we had like 1, 2.
2.
Okay.
Did I say 3 or 4?
Yeah. See,
Yes,
there's this
3.
tendency to exaggerate. Is this a natural human tendency to take a number or to take a concept and always exaggerate it? Is
trying to
anybody
think.
ever not over exaggerate things?
Maybe. Did 49 publish already?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, then we have 2 in the bag. This will be 3.
Yeah.
I don't even know what date. August.
Yeah.
So we have a topic.
Yeah. We have a topic. And so the topic came out of a book I'm reading. It's called The Prism of Lyra, or some people pronounce it as Lyra. And it talks about like the human origin, with like the fact that we're made out of stars, and what does that mean if we're made out of actually our genetical makeup is makeup of other species and things like that. And then it talks about the Orion Wars, kind of as one of the origin points of establishing like cultural narrative, maybe, or establishing the progression of like human consciousness. And I say human, but of course, Orion Wars, I will say humanoid type of consciousness. But I don't know if humanoid applies solely to Earth or if it can be used towards extraterrestrial species as well.
I think if it's got 2, if it stands on 2 legs and it has 2 arms and it has a head and a face, that's humanoid.
Yeah, the books is basically like when the all species were established, one of the criteria for the genetic makeup was that criteria.
Yeah. Like, whenever you see and quote alien on TV, like the grays or the tall ones or whatever, those are all humanoid.
Yeah.
And I guess, sort of looking like a praying mantis or a cat, I guess those would be feline or insectoid or something.
Still two hands, two
Yeah,
feet.
I don't know that.
And even the felines, the Lyran felines stand on 2 legs.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know that those would be humanoid. Maybe they would.
Yeah, I don't know.
A humanoid what, with fur? What does that change?
Yeah,
Are gorillas not humanoid?
probably humanoid, definitely. Anyway, so the topic actually, let's say it originates like the title as Orion Wars, but it talks about the essence of all creation, or the essence of all experience, human or humanoid, let's say, is to reach the balance between the infinite interpretation, and I mean quite literally infinite interpretation, and the book refers to it as the positive and the negative, all right, or you can be looking at it as the light or the darkness, to where one is completely in the love and light on the positive, and then thus sees everything as a infinite interpretation of the divine, and therefore nothing is bad. Or you can be on the opposite side of it, where you see everything as an experience of self, like self-fulfilling prophecy of this is I, and this is how I is going to present itself, and this is how I is going to experience itself. And so you're more separated from the, I guess, the wholeness that is the oneness of the divine. And you kind of very narrowly see the existence as you. Possibly you could interpret yourself as divine interpretation or not, but it's kind of like self-centered. And thus the book calls it the negative, right? I would disagree with the positive and negative labels. But the idea that the path on this scale leads you to a very specific set of experiences and outcomes, and the path on this scale leads you to very specific scenarios and outcomes. And then thus the creation or the point of all creation is to experience this balance. And the Orion Wars basically was interpretation of that. And the human species come out into this development with a memory of Orion Wars.
Do you want to explain the three categories?
Yeah, so the three categories. So this is interesting because the book was written sometimes in the 80s and the Star Wars came out sometimes in the 80s.
70s.
Oh, 70s. Okay. So the book very obviously references these very specific terms that the Star Wars uses. So I don't know if they decided to do that in order to just be able to correlate to something that humanity is very much familiar
To
with.
make it more relatable.
Yeah, or if somehow Lucas's idea behind Star Wars was in any way associated with these people, because this was channeled long time ago and then compiled sometimes in the early 80s. So I don't know. So anyway, the idea is if the society or the culture or the planet or the star system is completely on the, let's say, negative polarity, where it is all I driven, right? You're the furthest away from the interpretation of the wholeness and the divine, kind of like that is how I would position it. Then the interpretation of that scale of all the little propagations that it would have is referenced to as the empire in the book, and then thus in Star Wars. And the opposite end of that scale, which book refers to as the positive, is the star systems or the beings or let's say cultural mindsets of everything is the reflection of the divine. And then thus nothing is outside of the divine. So any interpretation of divine is an interpretation and thus reflects the divine. And so through that mindset, when you go into it deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, you can potentially basically not see a need to retaliate and the society becomes very peace oriented. Everything is love and light. There's no fighting. There's no argument. And everyone's in sync with that. And if the society as a whole basically becomes consumed with that process, which, one part of the Lyran structures is that they were, then by default, you become, and then this is what the book referring to. I don't remember if they used this term, but I will use this term, victims. The dominants end up subjugating
Right.
the victims.
Like pacifists to an extreme.
Yes, I guess.
But even like okay with it?
Okay with it and doesn't necessarily see the need to fight. There's no such thing as fighting, right? Like you and I kind of tried to have this conversation in the past, Gandhi style, like there's that everything is love. And then through the ultimate interpretation of love.
But Gandhi used it as a form of resistance. There was a purpose and a mission behind his thing. It wasn't, I'm gonna roll over and take it. It was through peaceful protesting, through, nonviolence, try to, enact some change.
Or maybe Gandhi's on the resistant
Martin Luther King as well, right? He's not waving guns around and beating people up. It's through peace we can enact change, as opposed to someone who was just completely. I didn't read the book, but my understanding, what you told me, was not so much that, but more of a whatever it is, we'll roll with it.
Well, what we cannot understand. So, right, when I paint these scales and when I try to explain these scenarios, we as humans would never be able to understand what it means to be on the complete opposite scale of, let's say, positive or light, right? If you think about society that is the gardens, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, right? If the society is in ultimate contact with all existence and everything is coming out of the heart center, it would almost be impossible to interpret anything outside of that scope. But then imagine just if you can touch on that aspects, but imagine having, lifetimes and lifetimes in that rhetoric to where you go further and further and further and deeper into that idea to where, generations, civilization, star systems are all basically birthed and thrive in that environment only, right? So to them, it's not even necessarily pacifism. It's just a completely, I would say, open heart space living,
Right.
to where even the idea of what it means to resist or disagree or not see would be outside of the scope of their understanding.
Right.
And same thing on the opposite end as well, right? Like the idea of the empire and the dominance and the idea that this is somehow wrong also becomes lost, right? If you're in the middle and you can see both scales, then you can start to interpret reality as like, oh, look, here's all these variances. But to them, being on the, that side of polarity, let's say on the negative, on the empire, the dominant way of being, they just see themselves. An expression of themselves is self-fulfillment. And then thus it becomes dominance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the book points out. If you're that far out, the natural progression of things is dominance.
Right.
Technology, dominance, rhetoric, dominance, self-dominance. You cognitively don't realize that you're actually here. You are somehow exercising dominance, but just all the natural actions of self, like the subconscious program that you're just living in, by default, it facilitates itself as dominant.
Yeah.
So, and again, we would not understand the deeper scale of that.
Right. It's it's like, you think, not to immediately go there, but you think the Nazis, as exercising dominance. But it isn't even, that's not even the right.
No.
Dominance is not the same as evil.
Yeah. No, in this case, there's just like this innate interpretation of their existence results in the interpretation of I, the furthest we can get from the connection to the wholeness in order to experience the I at the depth. And the I at the depth doesn't see such thing as consequences. It doesn't see such thing as butterfly effects. It doesn't see the relation between us and them and cause and effect. I mean, cause and effect are noticeable, but you almost dive into this like, here's I, and this is all I know.
So it's almost like a group narcissism, kind of.
I mean, if we just don't have words for it. Yeah, we don't have words for it. But if right with us, I look at that. This is what I was thinking. I cannot help but look at that, and just like the book calls it negative, right? Yeah. But they don't mean it negative like bad versus good. They mean like negative light versus positive light, right? Mm-hmm. But it is still light. This is still an emanation of the wholeness,
right?
Just propagating itself in this particular interpretation that humanity has a memory of, just like we have the memory of the positive, but we're constantly fluctuating on the scales. And so then I will introduce the third aspect, which is the resistance. So sooner or later, there's beings who saw that these two polarities were basically out there, and decided that they were going to wrong the right, let's say, and step in and trying to defend the victims who at the time don't even believe that they're victims, right? Against the empire who doesn't even believe that they're bad. and so the resistance comes in and it fights the empire in order to save the victims with their own, let's say, agenda, right? Because they're seeing one is wrong and the other one is wrong. And then therefore they see themselves as right.
Right.
But then, there's the aspect there is that they're still fighting.
Yeah. So none of those are the ideal state, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess the thing to point out, and this is what we're very familiar with from the human standpoint, and this is like galactically why humanity is looked at as like this petri dish of potential, is because we're living with an imprinted memory of all of these scales, right? So we are technically both experiencing the understanding of resistance, we're experiencing the understanding of positivity on some scale, let's say not the extreme scale, but right, our scales are kind of brought in, and we're experiencing the scales of negativity, let's say, or the darkness or the empire on some scale, not right. So we have, and then the resistance and the positive and negative kind of create this triangulation to where at any one time we can basically bounce between all three.
Right.
We have understanding to some extent of all three.
For me, like that empire mindset, I can kind of wrap my head around it. Maybe, I mean, I'm sure not to the full extent, but the closest you can get is like, well, the Empire in Star Wars or the Nazis, but that's not really it, because it's not. This is different from this is a different concept from evil. This is just, and it is. I don't think it's the same thing as just group narcissism either. It's something else. But okay,
Yeah.
I can get like 60% of the way there. That victim thing of like, I can get to that space of oneness and connection, but at the same time, I don't think I can get to that space where whatever happens is okay, and then there's okay, well people are getting murdered in the street, that's fine too. That's also hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
So the resistance, I can't. I feel like I can understand that.
Well,
I can, okay. I see an
scenario,
injustice.
though.
I see a perpetrator. Maybe there's something I can do, overtly or covertly to try to fix it.
Yeah, but think about this. Given the scenario to begin with, these systems lived in isolation from one another.
Right.
So the idea on the light side that somebody would come in and murder was never an option.
Right.
Therefore, they got to experience the full extent of this positivity without a threat of anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So only when another star system comes into their existence, they're like, wait, what? And then thus they become subjugated to the dominance that basically work their way into their way of being, which is dominance and oppression. It becomes looked at as oppression because to them, they don't even see the possibility, right? If the child is naive when the child is first born, right? Let's be honest, like most children don't understand, like, oh, somebody's taking advantage of you, right? And at first you're just kind, and then they come in and you're kind, and they ask for your ball and you give them the ball, and then they ask for your tower of blocks and you give them tower of blocks, whatever. The idea that this is something negative, like that this is something that you're using your sovereignty to, and you're being abused, and this doesn't enter your space until somebody says, like, well, they're bullying you. Like, oh, wait, you're being bullied.
You're not going to get that ball back.
Yeah.
You're just taking your lunch money.
Right. And so somebody almost has to teach you this concept of unkindness if all you know is just, wait, why wouldn't I give someone their ball if they really want to play with my ball? Right. And so we as humanity are very familiar of going from the childhood innocence of like, oh yeah, I will give everything to everyone. At least I am. To like, wait, if I give this to this person, chances are I'm not going to get it back. Oh, look, I have to protect, my skateboard because if I don't lock the gate, it will be stolen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like you learn the aspects of the negative, in my case, through the lens of what it means to be completely on the positive.
Yeah.
So Earth is this petri dish of this experimentation.
Right. And you start putting people into the spectrum of, ooh, I can't trust this guy because they're going to screw me over, to, well, maybe I can trust this person because they haven't screwed me over yet. But, played out that it can build mistrust. And
well, you design
You
a
get
rhetoric based on
you get
your
hardened.
experience. Yeah, right. Like the rhetoric of the outlook of society is designed based on your experience.
Right.
Through, I hate to say it, mishaps. Right. So the Star Wars or slash Orion Wars, was basically, imagine playing this game not on the level of humanity or not on the level of Elliot, but on star system level, right? Where the entire society only knows kindness and love and light. And then the entire society only knows what it is like to just, let's say, take and use and dominate and then run and control. But again, I would point that out, not from a malicious intent. Their intent is just, this is what the society is. This is how we function. But the second you marry two star systems that are on completely opposite scales of each other, one of them becomes the dominator and then thus the abuser, and one of them becomes the subjugator, hence the abuse. And then there's the third, which is the resistance. They're like, oh, this is not right because we made a judgment call here.
Yeah.
And then you go into fighting.
You go and try to fix it.
Yeah.
Right.
And you try to fix it by, how are you going to resist? Well, you're going to resist through a fight. To save these people, because they don't know any better, is to try to fight the people who are the oppressors.
Right. I mean, there's different ways to do that. I mean, I think in a very real sense, Gandhi and Martin Luther King were in that resistance category because they were trying to stop some oppressor and help some victim. They weren't using violence to do it, right? In the same way that,
I mean, Nelson Mandela is also one of those.
Sure.
Yeah.
But,
Mother Teresa in some way.
But in the same way that, whatever's going on in pick a country at war, it's the same thing. It's just they're using, I'm being vague on purpose. They're using, guns and tanks instead of peaceful protests. It's all of that to me is filed under the resistance. It's just, what techniques are they going to use? What's okay? In my book, it's okay to, have protests and to peacefully resist. Okay. But, shooting someone's not okay. Well, in my book, if they're an enemy combatant, I can shoot them, but I'm not going to kill civilians and women and children. In my book, everyone's fair game because we've been oppressed for 1,000 years, and those are all.
But that's the scale.
That's the scale, right?
That's the scale of humanity.
I'm willing to fly an airplane full of passengers into the World Trade Center because of what I believe. That's okay. In order to, they're doing their resistance for what they believe.
So
that's an extreme example.
So what I want to point out is the purpose of humanity, the entire purpose of our existence, is to see all 3 points and be within the circumstances of all 3 points. Have this life actually reflect all nuances of it, of the resistance of the victim and the oppressor, right? Or the aggressor or the oppressor, whatever you want to call it, and be able to coexist within ourselves, knowing the nuance of all 3.
Somewhere there's some middle of that triangle, center of that triangle that is, and maybe it isn't that there's some one point to land on, but it's to be able to call upon the aspects of all 3 at the right time.
Yeah. So the book doesn't actually go into the details of this, but because
there's no moral judgment.
Well, there's no moral judgment, but the book basically says the goal of all existence is to basically find the balance between the 2 polarities, right? And the resistance, to some extent, just fits somewhere on the scale, right? But the reason I specifically bring in Orion Wars is because resistance, to some extent, still has us landing on the 3rd point outside of the line. If the line is between a positive and a negative is linear, resistance almost places on a 3rd line to where we're both interpreting the positive and the negative.
Yeah, the resistance.
It builds a triangle instead of a linear.
The resistance is not in the middle between those 2.
Yes.
It's somewhere else.
So there's this 3rd point of interpretation. Now, I say 3rd point. I want to say if I had to, I was young when I watched Star Wars, and it was dubbed over in Russian when I watched it. But in Ukraine, it was kind of like this, like, wow. I think just like it was here, right? When the Star Wars first came out, this dates me, but I was like, oh my God, right? And then our neighbors had an illegal copy of it because that was the only way you can get American movies.
Did Darth Vader in Russian?
I think so, but I think they just left that in, maybe.
But they would have had to put the words in.
Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. Now my memory of it starts to blend between English and Russian.
Do they have some sort of James Earl Jones level voice actor for Darth Vader?
Well, no, it's dubbed over. The English is still there. And then the Russian...
Oh, it's just turned down. And then,
yeah, the volume on the English is turned down.
Oh.
And so you hear the English and then you hear the Russian.
Oh, so they didn't even do a good job of it.
Well, I mean, that was probably the easiest way to...
I guess if you're doing an illegal copy, you don't have isolated audio tracks to play with.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, all the movies we watched in English was that way.
Oh,
we
almost like on the news when they're interviewing someone and they're speaking in a different language and then someone talks over it with what.
Yeah.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, when I say dubbed over, I don't actually mean,
you mean
like
over
like
over. You mean on top of over.
Yeah. Right. And so what I want to say is humanity, to some extent, is designed, and this is what I want to say, my experience with Star Wars, who you can relate to the most, right, is the Resistance. Like, right, so the Star Wars Chronicles are supposed to have you root for the Resistance. Where you want the Resistance to win, right? Now, for the most part, we want to say, oh my gosh, the Empire is completely bad and we can never relate to that type of badness. And the victims are obviously in the right, but they just don't have the willpower or the resources to stand up. And thus, the Resistance becomes the voice of the righteous, and then the Empire is bad. But at the same time, Lucas kind of does this pivoting point where he tells the story of the Empire, right? Like, he brings in the characters to where you start to feel sympathetic with the Darth Vader or with Anakin, right? Before he becomes Darth Vader, correct?
Spoiler.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, right?
Yeah.
But do you want me? So his goal in storytelling, or the goal of us understanding the middle ground, is being able to understand the origin point of the Empire, but at the same time understand the origin point of the victim, and then see ourselves in camaraderie with the two, but not one thereof.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of, like, there's Sleeping Beauty, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like, obviously, Sleeping Beauty's the victim. Obviously, Maleficent's the bad guy. ... But then they made a movie. Around
and the
Maleficent.
Wicked is the same thing. That
was my next example.
Yeah,
There's a Wizard of Oz. Obviously, the Wicked Witch is literally the Wicked Witch. It's in her name. Obviously, she's bad, and Dorothy is, of course, good. But what would you do if someone dropped a house on your sister? I've never seen Wicked, so I don't know. But it's there's a lot of of course, every story has a protagonist and an antagonist. That's what makes it a story.
Yeah.
And it is interesting to try to look at it through the opposite lens, to go, wait, what don't I know about their portrayal? Because it's almost as if this was written by because in the end the protagonist almost always wins, and it's like, well, history is written by the victors, so you never get to see the other side of the story, and that's not to excuse these atrocities of blowing up planets and Star Wars and whatever.
Yeah.
But they're not. You can't just boil it down to where they're just evil. That it's that easy. It's that simple. End of story.
Yeah.
There's more it's more nuanced and there's more depth and there's more complexity.
But the complexity is within us.
Yeah.
Each one of us is supposed to reminisce on this nuance of the self, right? If you have the light within you, you know what the light is. And if you have the dark within you, you know what the dark is, right? And as humanity, let's say our goal, if there's such thing as a goal, is for us to draw awareness on the faceted nuance of our existence. And then be able to understand, here's the tendency, and here's where things can get lost if you go too much this route. And here's the tendency, and where things get lost if I go too much this route. The book mentions that there are some societies who was it, the Pleiadians. The book says, now I don't know if this is true or not, but I will just state it. That they some of the stars. So Pleiadians is a huge star system, and some of the star systems in the Pleiades basically isolated themselves at some point to such degree, right? And they were so immersed in the light that they even forgot there's such thing as this opposite scale of existence. Now, in their case, right, from the deeper soul perspective, they wanted to go into a deeper expression, right? Because if you have dove in and all you know is this light and all you know is this, right? The premise of the existence or the book says that you will always know that something is missing.
Right.
And you will always know that this light is off balance and there's something else. And so thus the scale, right, the humanity's interpretation of the scale is to know both and to be within both.
At first that like, well, how could you possibly forget that? But it's like, it wasn't that many generations ago that we were all hunter-gatherers and that we were all, we had a real connection with nature and stuff like that. And most people in modern society just don't. That has been collectively forgotten. So I don't see. So I think that's perfectly plausible.
Yeah. No, I mean, with me, I actually remember my life on other star system where that was the case. And I actually remember the far end of that scale where you just simply are, interpreting existence in the most serene way. And so the ideas behind conflict or ideas behind, I don't know, it's just, you can't even, right? From that standpoint. So if something comes in and takes your ball away and doesn't give it back to you, and it doesn't even want to play with you, just takes your ball and goes, you're in shock.
Right.
Like you don't even, you cannot even comprehend that concept of what it means. So, right. And so, with us, we get, what's the word?
Amnesia?
No, we get thrown in. I guess I will use thrown in, but there's a specific word. Into this mix where we very quickly, my book kind of states that, like, you very quickly as a child learn these scales. You learn these interpretations. I don't know if you can relate to this, but being love and light, and you come in, and then the universe is just, you have the memory of infinite potential, and you have the memory of this amazing way of being. That is how it was for me. And then all of a sudden, this intense, immense experience of otherwise. And then you're like, wait, what? I can share my ball, and that is not a thing?
Yeah. I mean, it builds this hard shell around you, and you have to protect yourself, and you have to.
Well, no, it's not. It builds hard shelf. That's the trauma that you have to live through, and then process, and then bring up to the surface to de-densify. But that's just the aspects of how humanity has mishandled the scale. But the truth is, it just brings you this other perspective. Like, oh, look, somebody's plays differently. There's a different way to play with the ball. where the person who gives you the ball has nothing to do with your gameplay, and that's okay. Do you know what I mean? The hard shell is the reaction to the shock
I see what you're
that
saying.
you're not
Yeah.
able to process.
Okay, yeah.
And so like our
yeah,
podcast, when we deal with trauma processing and pain body, is just interpretation of that.
Right. That's separating your reaction to it from the event itself.
Yeah. And so the scale, so here's what happened. The scale of positive and negative of interpretation of reality in all these ways exist, but without an opinion of good and bad. On this scale, you're not forcing an opinion to good and bad. You're not densifying the quantity of anything and then drawing an opinion and then thus making the truth be, oh, here's a bad thing and here's a good thing. That is something that we do in three-dimensional human scale. Because through this quantitative assignment of value, we're then able to sooner or later release the density that has us holding it and then start overlooking these concepts, right? Where we're going right now, where you and I mostly, where we should be, is overlooking of these concepts. Where we would right, just like we would analyze Star Wars from this completely separate standpoint, to where we're not into the pain body of being the victim and Darth Vader is the bad guy, right? We would just simply go, oh, look, here's an aspect of reality that is somebody's truth. And how does it feel, right? You can dive in and go, well, here, how does it feel? And, and Star Wars, Lucas's point is he kind of takes you into the story of Darth Vader. And here's how this being became what it is. The only point of collapse that happens is when we draw in our trauma and then collapse that reality as a bad thing, right? But that is a definitionally human way of experiencing polarities, right? But the rest of the world, doesn't densify as much as we do. They don't get lost,
right,
in the density. So they're just kind of overlooking this, right? To some extent, resistance represents the collapse, right? The victims are being what they are, right? They're almost like happy being the victims. They lost self in the wholeness, and then thus there's no self-identity that would like cause them to uprise and go, oh, we're going to militantly fight the empire.
right.
And the empire lost itself in like, oh, here's how we expand, and here's how we experience more, and here's how we have more and more and more and more.
Business is business, and business must grow.
Yeah. And so they lost themselves in the concepts of that, but they're not collapsing that into or good or bad. They're just kind of out there. And resistance is almost what's collapsing the probability into definitional structures of good and bad. And humanity can kind of relate to resistance, right? So we can understand the good and we can understand the bad, but we insert the scales of trauma good and trauma bad. And like we densify it and we viscerally believe, and we're going to go fight and we're going to go train and we're going to convert other star systems to our side in order to get more research. Do you know what I mean? All of that, think about it, all of that is big. Like the interpretation of that is big.
Yeah, yeah.
The empire almost does this in like a natural like way of progression.
The empire seems, like it would be, calculated and efficient, and we've got goals, we're going to go achieve these goals, and whatever's in the way doesn't really matter. In the same way that you don't account for the anthill when you're building a house.
Yeah,
that's just collateral damage.
And, yeah, but they don't even look at it as damage.
But you don't even notice that the anthill. That's what I'm saying. It's like more. It is more like an anthill, because it's like, it's not like, oh well, the civilian died when we dropped the bomb on the terrorists. Well, people feel bad about that. Nobody feels bad about bulldozing over an anthill when you're building a house.
Yeah.
You don't even know it's there.
Yep. So yeah, so they're not collapsing the reality into definitions, where resistance is, and the humanity is, right? So we're lost in the definitions, and so, this is what I want to point out is what the Orion Wars or the Star Wars are teaching, right? or what the ascension of humanity actually looks like, is if the resistance collapsing itself into definite structures and of good and bad, rising above the definitions of the structure, meaning releasing the density, right? And then starting to see the scale from the range of its possibility. And then the balance can only be found then. So the only way for you to find balance is not to be resistance and be really good at it, is not to be a victim and be really good at it, and is not to be the empire or the oppressor and be very good at it. Uncollapse the structure. So release the resistance where the fight needs to be fought. Right? That's what Earth is. We are continuing to fight the fight because internally we're trying to basically treat this as a triangle as opposed to a three-dimensional triangle where this needs to come up to the surface.
That's what I was going to say. Is it's we've in the same way that there's the straight line of victim to empire, right? And then you have to go out in the second dimension in order to get to the resistance. You almost need a third dimension, which would make it like a pyramid. To be, you're in the middle, but you're also above, out of it.
Yeah. Right? Well, I guess the way I saw it is, if you imagine the linear progression, let's say if this is good and this is bad, right?
Thank you for putting good on my side.
Right. This is the scale at which the entire civilization, all by civilization, I mean, all interpretation of life, all the interpretation of living, both physical and non-physical, right? It functions in this, and you interpret this on this entire scale. But then resistance, instead of interpreting this on this fluid scale, and then you have nuances here and here and here and here and here, resistance collapses the probability and defines the structure. In this case, the definition of the structure of Earth, the three-dimensional structure of Earth, is this scale collapsed into a probability of good and bad.
Right.
Interpreted individually. So basically it creates its own scale of interpretation within each human.
Neither the victim nor the empire have any sort of moral judgment about what's going on.
Yeah.
But the resistance certainly does.
Yeah.
They have decided this is good, this is bad.
The probability
we need to fight the bad
to
help the good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we can talk about this on this grander scale, but I want to point out that this is the scale within each human. Each human represents the whole, like quite literally all galactic whole within this scale. We have collapsed the probability into this definitional structure that we hold as our own set of opinions of what is good, what is bad, who's right, who's wrong, because we're familiar with the badness and because we're familiar with the goodness. But within this collapse, we're not experiencing and outlooking this concept and then thus are able to reach balance. We're just lost in the density. This is where, the yin and yang is this, right? Except it's misinterpreted. I know people are going to get upset. But, right.
Won't be the first time.
No, back when we started Tai Chi and we were doing Tai Chi, right? And there's a lot of Taoism has a lot of interpretations of what energy is and what is the light and what is the dark and the fluidity between the light and the dark, right? What the Taoism and Tao and the like all martial arts teach is this balance between the light and the dark.
Right. Well, there's light and the dark. There's like the masculine and feminine. There's like the inside and the outside. There's the offensive and the defensive.
Yeah.
But there's just, you name it. There's all these opposites.
Right. And then, the eye of the fish that exists within the yin and yang, meaning that both reflect the other. There is one in the whole, right? But I guess let's say another interpretation of yin and yang is to recognize that it is held. I mean, I think a majority of some people do, but like if you look at the symbol and you don't actually think anything about it, and I don't know if anybody teaches this, is that it's contained within the parameters of definition. the symbol of yin and yang is contained within the circle that has the definitions of the light and the definitions of the dark, and the fact that the light holds the dark and the dark holds the light. And that is the three-dimensional interpretation of humanity.
Right. Not answered is what's outside of that circle.
What's not outside of the circle, but the resistance is bringing the collapse, which is what yin and yang is. Let's say yin and yang is actually the resistance. You bring that collapse up, and when you raise up, right, when you go up and you see the scale, the light and dark are quite literally just become not scaled. It's like, let's say it becomes gray, right? There is the ball itself that contains the light and the dark and the equals proportion thereof within itself, after you stop defining the scale, is oneness, right? The circle that it is being held in is oneness, right?
Right.
But the oneness without a definition.
It's not even a gray circle. It's just grayness.
Sure. I'm trying to say gray. It's actually not gray, but like to me, from the marketing standpoint,
blended. Yeah, black plus white equals gray.
Yeah, right. From the marketing standpoint, I'm interpreting color, but it is actually just oneness, right?
Yeah. Undefined.
Undefined.
Open.
And then thus uncollapsed. The probability of the existence is uncollapsed because there is no definition to it, right?
Yeah.
And so the Orion Wars or the Star Wars or the goal of each human, and thus all humanity and all humanoid species or all existence as a whole, from the inception of origin of life, all life, is to, on our scale, on the humanoid scale, is to uncollapse the probability, which is what we're going through right now and which is what everybody's struggling is. How do you uncollapse the probability is step one. And then once you uncollapse the probability, where do you find yourself in? And then the answer is you find yourself in the infinite interpretation of all things that is wholeness, thus reality. And so then you create reality ultimately from the infinite interpretation of the full scale of this line of work. Right?
Yeah.
And so, honestly, it's just an amazing time to be alive. I know a lot of people say that, but this is why it's an amazing time to be alive. The humanity right now is going through this. This is what our precipice is. We're standing on the precipice where we're collapsing the definitional structure, right? We're raising above our densified definitions, right? So we're removing the resistance out of our being, quite literally, right? This is a very appropriate word. And once you remove the resistance and you enter into this elevated space of being, right? The frequency of you, right? So when you rise above, right? And you collapse the definitional structure of all existence, right? You start to experience the vastness that is the infinite potential of interpretation, not drowning in the definitions, but infinite interpretation within the open concepts.
Right.
And so the if you go back to the Lyrans, this goes back to the Lyrans from my memory, is the reason Earth was set up the way it was set up is because the humanoid structure in a three-dimensional form had to anchor in the two polarities with a full extent of it knowledge, like full extent of it all potential and full extent of like what it means to hold the negative and what it means to hold the positive and know the scales. And within us have this internal war of self that is our balance between, but not balance between to where when you're over here, when you're on the scale, when you're on the flat line, right, you kind of like take on this role and you just stay in that role and you're like, oh, okay, well, here's me. Our three-dimensional density that dipped us into the concept of resistance, right, collapsed the probability with us on such scale that we were just basically balancing in a very concrete way, very densified way between these two scales. seeing the nuance and outline of it, but not experiencing it to the full extent because they don't want us to collapse or to get lost in, just like, for example, if Pleiades did in a star system where you just basically lose yourself in that cycle. So by default, the superpower that we have is actually the ability to know the dark, the ability to know the light, and then be able to fluidly move through the entire process over here because we have learned to be in the density thereof over here in this pretend world, I would say.
So what you're saying is you need to fight the resistance.
It doesn't even come out right on your face when you say that. Seems wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, that makes sense. It makes sense to that we're here to experience and understand the full spectrum. I think when we're born, we're probably born on one side or the other. I think most people are born on the, you know, calling it naive is bad, but that side of like everything is perfect and what could possibly go wrong, which is beautiful, but then inevitably something goes wrong, accidentally or maliciously. I guess some people are
No, but that is what experience of Earth is to densify. And the only way you densify is by starting to define things as right and wrong.
right. Yeah, I mean, it seems really quick when we start putting moral judgments on things, and whether that's that isn't even necessarily some sort of well-defined, Kantian style moral judgment or whatever. It's just, I like this, I don't like that. Therefore, this is good and that is bad.
Yeah, but the idea of good and bad first to have to come in from the inception of an experience that locks you into the idea of good and bad.
Right. I mean,
and the densification of it.
I mean, good and bad in as much as I like it and I don't like it. And then that, I like it, therefore it's
But
good.
like and dislike are only there based on preset set of experiences and traumas that we have adapted ourselves in. My idea of broccoli not being so great to begin with originated out of me being forced to eat it.
Yeah, same with peas for me.
Right.
Although I stand by peas being horrible, except for in fried rice. That's the only place where they're acceptable.
Yeah, you almost can't taste them in fried rice.
Right.
So
Maybe that's why they're acceptable.
we don't even eat fried rice anymore. So, or not like the Asian version of fried rice.
I'm hungry. Broccoli soup.
Yeah. So the scale, I want to say, this is what to me it is. I guess visually in my mind's eye, I see what this is, right? At the same time, I want to say that when, to some extent, I don't know how, but to some extent, because this is a discovery for the entire humanity as the whole,
Mm-hmm.
but then this is a discovery for each being as an individual. Like,
yeah, both.
Everyone has to discover this for themselves
at both levels. Yeah.
That we will come to these conclusions, or we will come to this uplifted, non-densified interpretation at different times, even within our timeline. Like, let's say if our timeline continues, you and I will reach it at a certain time, but other people will reach it at a different time.
Yeah.
And so as this collapsed idea becomes open, right? As more and more people open to the idea that, oh wait, I'm collapsing my reality. I'm creating density. And as less and less people become dense, then let's say Earth in this timeline as a whole, or humanity in this time as a whole, will actually raise above into the vibratory structure where we're able to navigate the scales. And then different things will happen there. Like when you're up there and you start navigating those scales, the reality shifts in such a way to where you quite literally will experience a different band of possibilities altogether.
It just struck me that, the word dense, when used to describe a person, means that they're kind of dim-witted.
Or stuck in their ways. Like I think when I hear dense, is like dim-witted, but dim-witted implies what? There's no changing them.
Maybe, I mean, that, like, in a stubborn sense?
Well,
I
stubborn/stupid kind of became collapsed together.
They did. I mean, they mean very different things, but to me, dense is closer to stupid than it is to stubborn.
To me, dense, like, set in their ways, I guess, is what I
Oh.
always thought. Right. But, density is set in this way. The whole, think
Yeah,
about
right.
block of concrete.
Is it-
From the earthly standpoint, it's heavy. So if you drop it in the water, guess what? It's not going to float.
w- in Russian, is there a word for dense that also means dumb?
I don't know.
Oh.
Like my Russian is the kind of like colloquial vocabulary driven right now. So like I cannot draw things on.
Okay.
Maybe there might be. I mean, I can Google translate dense and see what comes up. Russian has a lot of very specific terms for specific things. So I'm sure
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah, there's all kinds of, I forget what they're called.
Idioms or
Yeah, idiom. You, sir, are the idiom.
yeah.
Yeah, idioms
Like-
that make no sense, but yeah, they have a meaning.
Yeah, no, Russian language has so many idioms that are like so specific to like, oh, the person who does this while doing this and knowing this is called that. And you're like, wait, what? Which I like them. But it's kind of interesting because the concepts are just like collapsed even more so, right?
Right.
Densified into even more things than English.
Such a weirdly specific word or phrase. Yeah.
Yeah. But not to the point where, you and I have adapted a lot of idioms and we created our own idioms based on like our family circumstance or circle, right? And some of them are Russian and some of them we just made up.
Mhm.
So the United States does that to some extent, like on the family circle or communal circle. But this is like, well, I mean, I say that I assume they're language wide, right? Like,
or at least region wide.
Yeah, region wide, maybe.
Right. I mean, Russia's big, and who knows whether people on the eastern side, the idioms are the same on the eastern side or the
Yeah, but if they
side,
made it into a dictionary, right, then there is countrywide. Now, whether or not it's used or not used, that's different, right?
Mhm.
I mean, some words are just we made up and they're not even used.
Yeah.
Right. But, that comes down to language, is a collapse. Part of the reason why we struggle with releasing density, right? And we resist to releasing density and lifting up is because of our language. Language is a tool that the world used to collapse. And like the Tower of Babel story that exists out there, some people think it is Earth's attempt to build a space faring base and then, and have the space lift up. But which might be the case, but it could also be looked at as the existence of all the languages that started up offered different cultures different way to create density.
Yeah.
Because language densifies us.
Yeah, and it does, and especially, how many times on this podcast or when we're just talking, especially about any sort of higher level topic, you're just like, I don't have a word for it. It's like the best I can do is, whatever. The best I can do is dense. But that's really not perfect.
Yeah, and dense is just what I started to use it because, visually, it is quite literally a densification of your being.
Right. It's like what you're trying the meaning you're trying to convey, and you can feel it, and you can think it, but it's like, well, here's your however many 1,000 words that's what you got. And it's like you can't okay, if you got paint, you can mix them and make almost any shade in between, but can't really do that with words. You're like, well, it's somewhere between apple and orange, but it's well, what does that even look like?
Yeah. No, a lot of the times whenever I channel or whenever I just speak and I end up channeling, a specific word has to come out. And then like, which is funny because that specific word comes in and they try to associate it within me through my English vocabulary. But then half the time, like it doesn't pop in. So I know what the word is and I know what the feeling behind it to begin with.
You've done it here on the podcast.
Yeah, I do this all the time.
Yeah, and I'm like, that's not the word I would have used, but at the same time, there's like a weight behind it.
Well, no, but
There's a
sometimes
density
I
behind
don't
it.
actually remember the word. Like I can't actually connect in. Like my human aspects cannot connect into the word, even though I'm feeling it. And this is what needs to come through. I guess I fail the transitory phase. And so I end up using silly words that, below, what is it? Age of 5, I think, is when you have your basic vocabulary. Is that the case? I think it's the case. Like, most of the colloquial terms is the age of 5.
I don't know. I think, a 5-year-old language level, while, not advanced, you can get by.
Mm-hmm.
You could get by.
Yeah,
if you
most
can
of the
speak a
foreign
language
language
at a
speakers.
5, if you can speak a foreign language at a 5-year-old level, you would be able to survive in that country.
Yeah.
Could you get a job in business? Maybe not, but you could,
Yeah, but then
go
you
to the
can
supermarket,
expand
you
on
could buy
that.
anything. You could
Yeah, you
sell
can
stuff.
expand on that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to say is that that's where we are right now. That's where we are experiencing our reality, is trying to learn right now to de-densify. And then everything you and I do in our podcast is basically tools for that. Just tools to release, collapse, definitional structures, right? We need to release definitions, which is easier said than done because like they're so subconscious and they're so ingrained in us, in our case for over 40 years.
Right.
That is difficult. Like even right now, talking about resistance and victim and the empire, like we already inherently put definitions. Oh, they're bad.
Yeah.
And using even the word negative and positive, it's not meant to be used as judgment, but through our language, we have already inserted definition into word negative and positive.
It's like, think of it negative and positive more like a battery terminal. You need both.
Yeah.
It's not like negative terminal is bad. It's just,
Yeah.
We've just.
But even word light and dark.
Just a convention.
Right. Light and dark.
Yeah.
The book that I'm channeling right now, again, plays with this idea of light and dark, right?
If you just called it A and B, it's like there doesn't feel like there's a lot of weight that we assign A and B. Well, is A better than B? Oh, they're both just letters. Or, like
it's more like
one
A through
and two,
Z, right?
or square and triangle. It's like, well, we don't have a lot of emotional investment in square and triangle or A and B like we do in negative and positive.
Yeah. But I think that's what it is part of the lesson here is to realize that our structure is embedded in all kinds of way. The density that holds us assigned and stuck in specific frequency that doesn't let us rise up and actually meet the influx that is the flow, where we can experience reality, is being held in our definitions. From anything from languages to norms, all right? Like our last podcast was on norms, to like stereotypes, to judgments, to traumas, to pain, to as malicious or as non-malicious as you would think. But everything, all the pattern, right, is in there. One of the examples that I was giving a long time ago was an exercise to go through, like imagine walking into your kitchen, right? And your kitchen has a set of definitions. And at first I thought, what do you mean kitchen has a set of definitions? Well, in America, let's say, right, you have a counter and the counter stands on the floor. So therefore, the density of the counter, regardless if it's made out of formica or granite, somehow pushes on the density of the floor and then stands upright, right? And then there's a faucet. You would just assume that there's water in that faucet. And if you were to turn on that faucet and there's no water in it, you'll be shocked.
Yeah, it
right?
is.
So only when you shock do you recognize, wait, this is outside of my preconceived definition.
Same thing with like a if the power's out and you just instinctively turn on the switch and just like, wait, oh yeah, that's right, the power's off.
Yeah, we have been having power outages many times recently, right?
Mhm.
And you intuitively walk into the pantry and you flip the switch and you're like, heck, I knew power has been out
Yeah,
for
right.
hours. It's just built in. So just like that habit of flipping the power switch whenever you walk into the pantry, we have these definitions subconscious. Like as a child,
I mean,
you never, your parents never said, oh, guess what, Tanya? Because this counter is made out of these pieces of wood that stand upright and they're being supported by a vertical piece of wood, and this pressure, gravitational pressure, pushes on this whole thing will stand up.
when those expectations fail, that's when a lot of problems happen. I did something very stupid years ago, and we replaced our stairs with nicer stairs. And
well, no, we were in the process of
we
replacing.
were in the process of replacing them, and I took the old stair out, the top stair, of course, of all stairs, and I didn't have the new stair ready to go in, so I put some cardboard or something over it, so that the cats wouldn't get down in that hole, because we didn't want them underneath the stairs. And I even wrote on there, "Do not step," all this stuff. I did it.
I even said, "You're an idiot, and
Yes.
somebody's going to fall through this."
And sure enough, I fell through it, because you just assume that if it's solid, you just assume it's there. You don't assume that there's a missing stair. And I took the stair out, and it hurt a lot.
We have this ingrained way of being that is so subconscious.
Yeah.
Into collapse set of definitions.
Yeah. Or driving. It's like, when do accidents happen? Accidents happen when people do something unexpected. When they stop when they shouldn't. When they keep going when they shouldn't, based on the conventions of the traffic laws. That's, it's like, oh, I'm going to stop and let some. We live near this weird intersection, and a while ago, we live right next to a school, and it was some teenager who's probably been driving for 3 weeks. He stopped at a green light to let somebody out, and it's like, you don't do that. I understand the gesture; that's nice and all, but you're going to cause more harm than good if you stop at a green light to let somebody out.
Yeah,
because nobody's expecting you to stop at a green light, and someone's going to run into you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it takes more brain power to uncollapse the probability that, oh, look, it's green. That doesn't mean go. And it takes you longer to process. So look, there's a car that is just standing still in the front.
Yeah.
So that's extra several seconds that you might not have to respond depending on how old you are.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not a teenager and your brain is still struggling to keep up with your body.
Right. Green means go.
Yeah.
Which pedals which?
Yeah. No, but the more time we spend ingraining ourselves into these sets, right? That's why driving, right, to begin with, like, you have to practice and practice because it's automatic. But when it becomes automatic, it's ingrained as a structure.
Yeah, but that has its own dangers, is because you drive on, autopilot, as it were, which, plenty of times I've been driving and I'm like, I don't remember the last 20 miles. I obviously drove them.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tell you a single thing about them. I just kind of zoned out. And obviously I turned the wheel and I switched lanes and I went through red lights and went through green lights and stopped at red lights and stop signs and avoided this and that. I did all that. No memory of it whatsoever.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen as much anymore, but it used to happen all the time.
But that's an example of a collapse probability where, in this case, through repetition, you just expect things to go a certain way,
right,
and you act by the rules of the societal norms, where turn signal,
right,
and then there's the light, and then there's the stop sign, and then there's the traffic.
And when it works great. It's just, and I think if like all of a sudden some kid ran in front of the road, I would notice it and stop, and I would really remember that event.
Well, yeah.
But it's because it was uneventful. It was a normal 20 minutes of driving. There was nothing notable about it at all.
But at the
only
same
thing
time,
notable was afterward, I'm like, I don't remember that.
Mm-hmm. How do you get there, right? But at the same time, if something were to happen, you would be less likely to respond to it quicker,
right?
Because you're zonked out,
right?
But that's our life. We don't even respond to things from the right state of being when we only function in definitions of expectations.
Right. We're on autopilot through life.
We are. And hence our collapse density sits on that autopilot. Our language and so there's these cues that just insert us into autopilot. Language is a huge thing that inserts us into autopilot. In fact, autopilot of programming that we don't necessarily actually want to be in. Like if you had to choose and go, hey, do you want your life to autopilot yourself into this scenario? You would go, oh, of course not. Like I don't want to not have money, and I don't want to not have abundance, and I don't want to not be happy, right? But through the choice of language, we collapse our reality subconsciously. That's why people say like choosing the right words really matters, because you're manifesting your reality. This is similar to that, but people are misunderstanding what that actually means. Is it is setting in the collapse probabilities based on the choice of the words that have already, within you define quantity or define probability of anything happening.
Right. And everybody, we all agree that, Apple means apple, but, until Apple means the company, or Apple means,
Right.
whatever, that's the thing, is that everybody has their own. We all, for the most part, have the same understanding of what the words mean, but some words mean different things to people than they do to other people.
Yeah, I mean that, or just, if you keep on talking about not being abundant, right? Like, oh, I'm so poor and I will never climb out of this debt and blah, 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 blah. Like, think about it. Like, just me saying that out loud, I can feel my density collapsing. I can literally go, oh, wow, look at that, where that's going.
Yeah.
And so choices of those words, right, just uncollapse the probabilities. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
I mean, I say that. I do it myself. I'm guilty of it doing myself. A while ago, this was years ago, I recorded a channel message that I called floating coffee makers, and nobody ever listened to it, but it's still out there. But the idea that they want to express is, why do the coffee makers stand on counters, right? Because we have decided that coffee makers don't float. Well, what if we decided that today all the coffee makers float? Like everything else stands on counters, but coffee makers kind of float up there. So if enough cognitive thought went into that idea, and enough percentage of people decided for that to be their truth, visceral truth, and we uncollapse the probability of coffee makers being stationary, it would actually quite literally change our reality. That's how it works.
Yeah.
No, nobody will ever do that, and it's not quite useful, but it would be pretty cool if the coffee makers just float. We don't make coffee anymore. We don't have a coffee maker, but
we should aim higher than a coffee maker.
No, but the idea,
but that's it.
They wanted me to communicate was that it's only the rule because we're collapsing the probability of it being the case.
Aim higher into, abundance and world peace, and there's actual problems to solve that everybody seems to agree are unsolvable. That's not helping.
Yeah, but like you and I lately, after my conversation with where was he? Whatever he was. Oh, right. The guidance we were given is, because we're collapsing our probability on the physical 3-dimensional level, one of the ways to go about it, once you really release enough density, is that you can, if you have released enough density, if you have done enough trauma and pain body processing and becoming aware of your thoughts to where you're not like drowning, right? And you're actually kind of like somewhat higher. You're not on the scale of the positive and negatives just kind of floating through it. You're somewhere on this process of ascension. Once you have ascended enough, you can be in the space where you can access any realm of you choosing, right? And in this case, right, if the goal is to receive healing and to heal and to propagate love and light, let's say, not because it's good versus bad, but just to propagate general feeling of ascension, right? You on the scale of uprising, you can tune into that scale and start doing work outside of physical space, outside of definitions of physical space.
Yeah.
Now, this is just a stopping point, not a stopping point, but this is just a stepping stone of, you and I can anchor into that, and we know what it means to do work on ethereal level, right? Or energetic level. But imagine this is just like a tiny little step, because up higher on that scale, there is no definition. right? On the scale of the positive and negative and light and dark, there's no collapse probability. Thus, everything is what you determine it to be. So if there's a floating coffee maker, you can make a floating coffee maker on your own. You do not need mass consciousness to make something happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
You are collapsing your own probability on that level.
Yeah.
Which is good and bad, At
an individual level.
Right?
Yeah.
So up there, they're actually collapsing. So like, if you just wanted to manifest a rose in your hand, you would just manifest a rose in your hand. Like some people have, do that. Kids do that. Like in China, they had people do that. Right. It is because they're up there without collapse.
Yeah. Or
enough collapse probabilities.
Any of the miracles from Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yeah. That's where they are, right? Yeah. So on the Yogananda scale, they're somewhere up there, functioning on the individualized interpretation of the infinite. Versus what we're doing here is we're functioning on the cumulative interpretation of the infinite. And then thus by default, limiting the infinite through our collapsed probabilities of norms and definitions and speech and, density. Right. So we kind of like the reason why we hold cumulative trauma is to continue to reinforce the collapse probability of its existence.
Feeds on itself.
To continue to have it as a definition, right? And then, to some extent, to continue to have it as our truth, right? And it's So, yeah.
Yeah. Is that a wrap?
Yeah, I guess that's a wrap.
Right.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.